This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. If you're enjoying these live chats, our main channel has even more World Cup videos looking at the greatest performances, the quirkiest stats, and the epic tales of World Cup cricket. This show was made by HCL Tech, a company that believes in partnership so much you can read their name on the Australian shirt. This show leans in hard on data and technology, so we are proud to work with HCL Tech, leaders in their field. Welcome to Wagon Wheel. I'm Jarrod Kimber. This is the show where fans ask questions that they are desperate to have answered, and I try and pretend to remember what the question is as I go off into a spiral. The best way to ask questions on Wagon Wheel is by becoming a Patreon member. And thank you to everyone on Patreon who supports us. But if you are not a Patreon member and you happen to be on the live on the YouTube, you can also ask them via the Super Chat feature as well. I say that like I know. Like I don't think I've ever done a Super Chat. I don't even know how you give money to YouTube. You people are amazing. Not as amazing as Philip Hewitt is. Hewlett. Well, that was close. That's why I stick with first names. I can make less mistakes, fewer mistakes. If Jofra Archer continues to be injured bowling right arm fast, could he keep his career alive if he switched to left arm finger spin and batting skills he used to rely on? Has there been an example of another cricketer doing this, such as Ben Stokes being seen to bowl off spin? There's a big difference. Ben Stokes can bowl a little bit of off spin, and probably in the India series will bowl a little bit of part-time occasionally for something different. Ben Stokes is not going to be playing as an off-spinner. And that's what you're talking about, because that's what Jofra would have to do if he can't bowl fast anymore. So that is massively different. Who are the best examples of this? Mark Richardson, Callum McLeod from Scotland is a very good one. George Dockrell from Ireland. Colin Zaboya from Kenya. So it happens a bit more at the level just below, and we see it in first-class cricket from time to time. It's less likely to happen in international cricket, top-level international cricket, sorry. And it's also less likely to happen to someone who's a little bit older. So, yes, it's possible. If, I don't know, let's say Jofra Archer went off and spent 3 years working on his batting or his left-arm figure spin. Maybe he could get it to a level where he would get picked for a team. I don't think he'd get picked for England, but maybe he could be a first-class cricketer with that. Batting, he's got okay hand-eye coordination, but it's kind of all over the place with how he sets up as a batter. I wouldn't be in a mad rush to go out and say that he's got, you know, if you compare it to Mark Richardson and you go back to the early part of Mark Richardson's career, Mark Richardson had an abnormal amount of not outs, and clearly had some batting talent. And we've seen that with other tailenders who've moved up the order, Ravi Shastri and some others as well, Andy McBride. It takes a long time, but I think all of those guys started from a much higher base than Mark Richardson. Than Jofra Archer did. So no, I don't think he would ever be a professional cricketer as a left-arm finger spinner / all-rounder. He's an incredibly talented person, though. I've said this before. He can bowl left-arm wrist spin as well. So, perhaps he could be a handy cricketer at the lower levels, but I can't see how he certainly wouldn't be playing for England with any of those skills. If nothing else, it would take so long for him to develop them. Bloody says, if bouncers were made completely illegal in cricket, how would it affect the sport? Yeah, so if you go back, the best batting eras are really before, that 1930s era, even into the 1940s, before bouncers are used kind of the way they are now. We obviously bowl a lot more now than we did back then, but, bodyline was a perfect example that the batters weren't really ready for that amount of bounces. And, we just saw a test match that certainly had more bounces than bodyline did, and there were probably, some West Indies test matches that probably did as well. So, what you would see is probably the batters getting massively on top again. How would it change footwork? You could, I suppose, bat further down your crease if you wanted to. I'm not as worried about a surprise short ball hitting you. I'm trying to think what else it would do. it would allow you to camp on the front foot if you wanted to. Maybe, a lot of players are front foot dependent though now anyway. I mean, the helmets have actually changed that a lot. We had a lot more back foot players before helmets through necessity to not be killed. So players are already a bit more on the front foot. Bowling strategy, I mean, I just think bowlers get less wickets overall. The bouncer is used by different bowlers in different ways. I think it was Ben Hilfenhaus used to bowl a bouncer in the last ball of the over if he, bowled a bunch of dots to try and get out of the over with a maiden. You've then got your players who bowl the bouncer as an attacking option. You've got players who bowl the bouncer because a player is getting on the front foot too often. And also, it's just the bouncer is just a hard ball to control. So I don't think it will be made illegal. I should say, I don't think it'll be made illegal anytime soon. And if it did, it would fundamentally change the cricket, change cricket in the same way that probably covered wickets did. I'm trying to think, even if it might even change it more than covered wickets. It's such an integral part of modern cricket, and it's never been more integral than it is now. So if we went from having bouncers, not having bouncers, but the other problem would be that it's a lot easier to see if a ball goes over a batter's head than it is to see if it goes between their nipple and their chin. And you're still going to bowl back of a length, right? I can't imagine people aren't going to bowl back of a length. So yeah, it would become a little bit tricky. But I don't know what all the unintended consequences would be. Satchmo says, did England make some fundamental errors in their preparation for the World Cup? Well, they didn't use their best players playing a lot of ODI cricket. I think when it comes down to it, they believed that they had cracked the code, and that their players would be able to they'd be able to snap their fingers, and the players would be able to go back to at least being competitive. I think they put all their eggs into the 2 World T20s, and perhaps if they're fully fit for both of those tournaments, they might have won both of them as well. They put all their eggs into that, which also makes more sense for the future. I mean, of recent news of what will actually happen to one-day cricket going ahead, it probably makes more sense to develop players for T20 as well. Plus, everyone's playing T20, so those things are a little bit easier. But in doing so, they certainly left themselves wide open to the fact that their players might struggle. But the one thing I would say, I think there was a pretty solid assumption in cricket, and I never quite shared it, but heaps of people do, that T20 cricket and one-day cricket were interchangeable. And I didn't share it for a couple of reasons, that there were players who I thought were good in one format and not so good in the other, or vice versa. And I thought that was interesting, because if they were completely interchangeable, kind of everyone would be good at both. And the other thing was, the 2019 World Cup. I mean, the interview I did with Cricinfo for Nicholas Pooran, where he went on and on about, and this is a guy who played a lot of T20 cricket by that stage, about just not understanding how to do it. And I've seen players also struggle trying T20 tactics in one-day cricket, and again, vice versa. So I think I was probably in the minority that believed that not playing as much one-day cricket would come back to bite them. Having said that, England were trying to play T20 cricket, one-day cricket, in a slightly more T20 style anyway. So they might have thought, even if they agreed with me, they might have still thought, yeah, but for us, it's a little bit different. It doesn't look like that now. But Owen Morgan retired. Jason Roy did lose form. I still think he probably should have come on this tour, in this series, but I'm not sure I was expecting him to make millions of runs. And Dawid Malan was in better form and could do that job. The Ben Stokes thing, that was always the plan. Perhaps Ben Stokes was just more injured than they thought he was going to be by that stage. The whole Harry Brook thing, I never quite agreed with. They never found a second spinner. They never found someone who was a proper replacement for Plunkett. They obviously haven't replaced Jofra Archer. Like, a lot of those things, I don't think that's their fault, right? A lot of those things are they're not quite as complete as they were last time. And what we thought going into the tournament was, well, maybe by playing Root at 3, Stokes at 4, Buttler at 5, Livingston at 6, that the extra power that they had available to them would allow them to blow teams away a little bit more with the bat. But everyone knew they had a weakness with the ball. So, I'm not really sure how they're supposed to rectify that. They don't have a second spinner that they can rely on to bowl 10 overs, or that is a frontline bowler, right? They don't even have really a Glenn Maxwell or a Muhammad. Well, they certainly don't have a Muhammad Nabi, but they don't even really have a Glenn Maxwell. Ali says, wouldn't ICC run annual leagues for tests and ODIs with centralized broadcasting rights, fetch more money for every board? Yes. Then why do boards just not be greedy and give up on bilaterals for centralized leagues for different formats? Okay. The biggest problem with this is they would have to give up all their power. So this was talked about. I've been writing and talking about this for almost a decade now. It's been talked about a lot. And I suppose the time when it had the most traction was when they bought the rights to cricket.tv. And there was quite a few older guys who wanted to save Test cricket on the boards. And this includes Srinivasan and Giles Clark, by the way. So we're talking powerful, powerful people. So the thought at that stage was, okay, well, let's make Test cricket into a league. We'll do it through cricket.tv. But divisions started to come in from the lower boards, right? This is really interesting. Essentially, the only way to make it work was promotion and relegation. And that the way that they thought it could work, the way that they wanted it to work, was 7 teams up, 7 teams down, which would have been great, I think. Someone like me, I probably would have followed Division 2. Most people would have followed Division 1, and we all would have been happy and gone on with our lives. Sri Lanka, West Indies, I want to say Bangladesh, but I don't want to throw them on the board in case I've got them wrong. But I think Sri Lanka and West Indies were very, very clear, saying, well, wait a minute, we will end up in Division 2 and no one will ever care about us anymore. The answer should have been from the other boards, then get better at cricket. Then train your players better. Then then look after your structure. Instead, everyone went, okay, and then there was Division, and then people weren't completely sure, and no one wanted to slip into Division 2. And would there be safeguards for England and India to make sure they were in Division 1? It got a little bit messy. But if you want to know the real reason why this doesn't happen, it is essentially because if the boards could do it, they would actually take the World Cup back completely and run it themselves, so that there isn't even a need for ICC. Everything you've just said there, Ali, would require there to be the ICC would be more powerful. And then if, let's say, they ran all the World Cups, all the Champions trophies, all the underage tournaments, women's tournaments, maybe disabilities tournaments under that, and then you also gave them the Test League and the ODI League, suddenly there is less reason for not the top 3 teams, certainly not the top 2 teams, certainly not the number 1 team, but there would be less reason for them to be as powerful or heard as much going into the future, which is true. That would happen. But they'd also have a guaranteed income into the future. They'd be able to get much more money. It's little things too, like by having a league and a streaming platform, what they would have been able to do is cash in on cricket fans all around the world. So at the moment, these boards can only cash in. And if there's 5 million people who live in New Zealand, and yet everywhere I go, there's a friggin' New Zealander, right? How is that possible? That must mean that there are a lot of New Zealanders around the world. Are there another 20,000 New Zealand fans outside of New Zealand that they could cash in on? These things are very true. The same with your domestic cricket. The sorts of things that cricket fans follow isn't exactly the boards will always go to the most popular markets, the Justin Bieber market, right? But they don't go to the Tom Waits market, right? And sometimes you have to do that variation as well to get all the different money. That's why the internet is such an interesting part of all this. There's heaps of money being left on the board. It's just a better system, but it require losing a little bit more power. Perhaps some famous teams getting demoted. And I would say the exact same thing. I don't care who the cricket team is. And I always use South Africa as this. South Africa were given Test status because fat, old, posh English people wanted to go on holiday to South Africa. No one thought they were particularly good. England would send Test teams or MCC touring teams, as they were in those days, with like a handful of first-class players sometimes. Sometimes guys who played, there are players who have played test matches in cricket, and that is the only first-class games they've ever played because they played against South Africa. No one thought they were particularly good. They went on a jolly. They play a test against South Africa. You shouldn't just stay in test cricket forever because someone wanted to holiday you in 1890. What are we even talking about here? It's so ridiculous that is a system. Like any sport, if you're good at it, you should be in the top tier. And if you're not good, you should be in the bottom. Then Manchester United should not be in the Champions League all the time just because they're Manchester United. They should have to earn it. And that was part of the reason everyone was upset at that stupid league that they were trying to come up with, right? Like, it would be better for the NBA if the New York Knicks were in the finals every year, right? But no one wants that. It would be horrible. You have to earn it. Anyway, I digress. Niran says, I asked you a question about Theekshana cloning himself. It's a fantastic question. If all-rounders cloned themselves, batted and bowled against each other, which battle would be the most interesting? Keith Miller, because everything Keith Miller did was interesting. Like to see Garfield Sobers with the new ball bowl to Garfield Sobers after, I don't know, West Indies have lost 3 or 4 quick wickets and he's in there under some pressure. That would be fantastic. There's a part of me that would like to see Imran Khan dead bat, Imran Khan reverse Yorkers. Aubrey Faulkner versus Aubrey Faulkner would be fantastic, by the way, because Aubrey Faulkner, the bowler, would be talking himself through what to do, while Aubrey Faulkner, the batter, is talking himself what to do. It would just be like constant talking from both ends of the wicket the whole time, and not at each other, at themselves, at all the Aubrey Faulkners. Who's another all-rounder? Louis Constantine would be, box office. Andre Russell would be box office. I know this is probably more of a test question, but I'd love to see Andre Russell versus Andre Russell. I'm trying to think of what's the old English all-rounder who, oh my God, who never hit the ball, who didn't score particularly much and had a low economy. I want to say Trevor Bailey, but I don't mean Trevor Bailey, do I? Maybe I do mean Trevor Bailey. But I was thinking if there was someone who was quite defensive with bat and ball going up against each other, would be kind of fun in a sort of perverse way. What would Dan Vettori do against Dan Vettori? Anyway, it's a fascinating question. Ben says, Murali and Bumrah seem to be mechanical freaks with actions impossible to replicate. Well, I think Naveen Al-Haq has a similar action to Bumrah. And I think there's a couple of younger bowlers coming through. One in India. I want to say one in the West Indies. You might have it as well. Can overcoaching, where techniques are almost perfect copies of each other, reduce such players coming through the system? Yeah, I mean, we see this in all sports, right? American basketball and all American sports, actually, a perfect example of this. I don't think it's a accident that baseball has Shohei Ohtani and he's not from the American system, right? I don't think it's an accident that the first point center in basketball is Serbian, right? The American football, it's surely a lot of the cornerbacks can play wide receiver and vice versa, and other positions as well, because it's similar skills in a lot of these situations. But America has gone down that thing of uber specialization, but through overcoaching. So at a young age, and there's also a racial profile in some of those American sports as well. It's American football is incredible, right? If you're this kind of athlete, especially racially, but even just this kind of athlete, even know that you're playing this other position really well, we're going to change you to this position. And so everyone with the same kind of build plays that position the same kind of way, because that's how they've learned how to play it, and they're trained in that sort of way. Cricket's very similar, right? So the vast majority of people, if they tried to bowl Jeff Thompson's action or Lasith Malinga's action, probably wouldn't be able to do it, and they wouldn't be very good. And if you want a collection of fast bowlers who are all really handy, and you all let them go off and do what they do, probably you wouldn't get that many. You wouldn't get 20 or 30 good fast bowlers, but you might get 1 or 2 absolute freaks. And so coaching goes the other way, right? No, you've got to have your front arm up. Well, maybe by not having your front arm up, that actually gives you another advantage. Is it Samuel Badri? I think he didn't have his front arm, and I think that's part of the reason he could slip the ball through a little bit more. He wasn't as strong as other bowlers, but he had a different way of bowling, and that gave him an advantage. And I do think, the MCC coaching manual, while being a respectable idea, and the people involved were right to try and do it and to try and work it out and everything, and early batting techniques were quite ropey, so they probably just wanted the overall standard to lift. The MCC coaching manual is very much to blame, because essentially I actually think it only works for, especially if you're talking about batting, I think it only works if you're bowling slower. Right. So once you get over a certain pace, you don't really want your front elbow over, and your leg extended and everything else. You don't even have time to play those shots to very, very fast bowlers. And the same with spinners. Actually, what you want to do with spinners is either go back or forward. You don't really want that forward defense in the middle. And I think a lot of that happens. We went, and women's cricket is the one that in my lifetime I've been able to see that once we disentangle women from the correct techniques, women have been a lot better at what they do. And we had, Claire Taylor is a perfect example of someone who I think her method was so much different than everyone else's, that she really had the ability to change the game a little bit in the way that she played. So I do think that, having different techniques does help, but I can also understand why coaches are very much they want everyone to be a little bit better, and then the really good players will still rise to the top anyway. But they do coach out freaks, which is why a lot of the freaks are later in life or completely random, and everything else. And it's tough. My dad was a fast bowler, and we had a bowler who played in our team that my dad coached, and this guy had a kind of like, it's kind of like a Malinga-like action. And everyone at our club tried to change this guy's action, and my dad wouldn't let them. And this guy wasn't quick or anything like Malinga, but people just, if he hit the right length, no one could hit him. It was like he was bowling with a tennis ball, and it must have been backspin, but we didn't know. But if he bowled a good length, it would just sort of come up at you, and whatever shot you tried to play, you were in the wrong position. If you tried to pull it, it was too full, and it was completely because he had this bizarre action, and those things do matter. And I know in T20 cricket, finding the bizarre actions has become something that teams really try and do. Rahul says, enjoyed the double century episode on New Zealand and Pakistan in the 92 World Cup. Everyone should go and do that. Was there any fallout between Martin Crowe and John Wright over the tactics in the semi-final? Do you find it strange that Crowe didn't have much of a coaching career, especially when he was so innovative and ahead of the game in terms of tactics? I'm not aware of Crowe and John Wright having a falling out, but I think, to be fair, at a certain point, and Martin was quite honest with this, I think Martin Crowe had a falling out with everyone. He was a very famous person, and obviously I don't ever think he thought cricket was beneath him, because he was a massive cricket head even when he was working in rugby, but I think there were times when he felt that he was seen as a bit wacko. What I found interesting about the Martin Crowe John Wright thing is, it's not like Martin Crowe was handing the captaincy over to like someone who wasn't also seen as a very smart cricket brain, right? Like John Wright is a pioneer in coaching. He was the first guy to talk about dot ball percentage and all those sorts of things. Why didn't Martin Crowe go into coaching? I don't know. I never asked him that, actually. It's a really good question. Now you've put it to me. I might ask one of the New Zealand guys one stage. I'm not sure he's the sort of person that would have wanted to. I think he would have been a good general manager. And I think that's actually how his brain would have worked. He would have loved to have access to the data, that we have now. But I think he would have been really good at that. I'm not sure he's the sort of guy that wanted to go around in a sweatsuit throwing balls. Like, it's a particular job, coaching, right? I could definitely have seen him in a suit making decisions, but I don't know about that. But he was a mentor to a lot of players, so he still did stuff. But he was, and I could say this as his friend, he was a strange guy at times. He could be incredibly intense. He could say really brutally cutting things. And I think he always thought everything was coming from the right place, but perhaps everyone else didn't. So I don't know how that would go as a coach. He could have coached, and he must have coached at some level. I know he did batting mentorship / batting coaching at times, but we're talking about head coaching, I assume you mean that. Niran says, if Shakib was born a few kilometers to the west in India, how different would his career have been? Would he have been the top left-handed all-rounder till Jadeja matured? or will Shakib being in the team have a negative effect on Jadeja being fully developed? That's a really interesting question, because I only read the start of this. I saw this question come up. And my first thought was that Jadeja bowls more like an Indian finger spinner and Shakib bowls more like a Bangladeshi finger spinner. Does that change if Shakib is brought up in Kolkata, right? I don't know. The other part of it is, and me and Kartikeya talked about this in 2019, of where would Shakib have batted if he'd been in better sides? Because his batting, I think, has developed quite well because he kind of had to be the grown-up batter at times. But if he was playing for better teams, he probably doesn't bat in the top 5. He probably doesn't bat 6, but he does bat 7. He might have actually become better, because I think I always thought that was his best spot if they could have kept him there. There was that brief period where he would come in the IPL and go absolutely crazy down the order. And I like the way he thinks about cricket and everything. He's made himself into a good batter, but I don't know if he is a top 6 batter for a really good side. Does that make it better or worse than Jadeja? Does he develop in the same way? I don't know. Would Jadeja, so if you swap him, and Jadeja's in Bangladesh, I would be really interested to see where he bats and how his batting would develop in that situation. I think the most logical thing is what you said before. I think Jadeja's a little bit better with the ball, certainly in Test cricket, but I think across all formats, I love Shakib's bowling, but I think Jadeja's a little bit better. Although perhaps, you almost have to compare their records away from home to see if that holds up across all 3 formats, and it may not. But I wonder, Shakib is definitely the better batter and has gone on to have a much more illustrious batting career. But I wonder if the roles were reversed, if Jadeja would have made more of his batting with the same kind of advantages. It's endlessly fascinating, that conversation. I have no answer. Ben says, Spectators running on the ground at the end is really hard to watch on old highlights. Why did it go on for so long? When and why did it stop? Probably starts, so 92 World Cup it happens. Is it happening by the mid-90s? Yeah, probably is a little bit, isn't it? Yeah, it obviously should never have happened. I think, am I guessing players got a little bit more power? Maybe insurance companies got involved. The security got a lot better. I think in Australia, we had a lot of pitch invaders, obviously, over a period, and it became impossible to run onto the pitch at that stage. Other grounds started following that. You've got then the Asian grounds around that same time started putting the cages up. So that changes things there. But also in the old days, there are games when the crowd is on the field, right, outside the rope. So it was very, very different, I think, at that point. And it's probably got a lot more hands off. But I think a lot of sports were like that, around the world. And probably by the 90s, we get a little bit more, we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be allowed. And some bad things happened as well. Players were attacked on fields. And, the Monica Seles incident, does that have anything to do with it as well? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. But from my memory, it's kind of that mid-90s thing where it starts to disappear. And it still happened occasionally, but it was much rarer than it used to be. Will says, England's death bowling has been an issue for years. Yes. What would have been the best way of solving it? Not bowling at the death. Literally saying to the opposition, how many runs do you want to make? And we're going to walk off. Short of inventing a time machine to stop Joe Root over bowling Jofra Archer. I would say this. Australia over bowled Pat Cummins, and he eventually got injured, and he missed years of him. I do think guys like Jofra Archer and Pat Cummins are probably injury prone anyway, especially when they're younger and their bodies are still developing. I'm not letting Joe Root off the hook, but I do think we have to admit that Jofra Archer was probably going to get injured one way or another, whether it would be as bad. Anyway, I don't know if there's a good answer for this, Will, because I kind of feel like if there was, they would have tried it. So who's the best bowler they haven't bowled in white ball cricket? Probably Benny Howe, right? Benny Howe is okay at the death, but you don't really want to bowl him at the death. Maybe had they thought about maybe had they really, really been planning a little bit further in advance, then Harry Gurney was the one. He's the one that maybe got away. The only other thing I'm trying to think if there's a combination between, let's say, Jamal Mills and Chris Jordan, where you've got one guy's going to take a lot of wickets and another guy's going to bowl very dry, and in tandem they might have worked together over a long period of time. I mean, both of them probably didn't quite make it work. So, maybe that isn't quite the case, but there's a part of me that thinks maybe, that could have happened. But yeah, I mean, sometimes this comes down, had they treated Jay Dernbach better? One thing I would say is that what they did with the wobble ball, I thought was really, really interesting. Jimmy Anderson perfects it. They get Jimmy Anderson to teach everyone else. That then gets taught at academies, and and elder bowling coaches know how to teach it, and they have a whole generation of guys who can learn it. Have they done that with slow balls? I mean, if it was me, and I've said this so many times, Benny Howe would be working when he's not playing cricket. Should be working with bowling coaches. Should be working with the academy. Should be working with the England team. On developing players slow balls and saying, okay, well, so your cut is getting hit. Have you thought of holding it with this group? Right? Because Benny Howe is thinking about these things in a level that no one else is. The only bowler I think that they were banking on, Will, is Pat Brown. Sadly, just hasn't been able to keep fit. I'm not sure. Yeah, he probably was a death bowler, wasn't he? Yeah, he might have been the one. Rogers. Oh, no, there's one other, and I forgot the other guy's name. Ruja says, what footwear do cricketers wear? Are they cleats like baseball players? I don't know what cleats are. Sorry, I never played baseball at that level. They're like an athletic version of a golf spike. It's probably the best way of doing it. So if you've ever seen golf shoes, do I have spikes here? Oh, I've got Sachin's shoe behind me, but it's got the rubber ones. I think my cricket gear's upstairs. Yeah, so just like little metal spikes. Some players wear spikes at the front, rubbers at the back. Some players do wear rubbers. There's certain grounds in the world, like Australia's a perfect example of you kind of have to wear spikes. The pitches are so hard that if you're wearing rubbers, you just slip more when you're running between the wickets, even than anything else. Some batters like to wear. There was a trend, I reckon, West Indies players of wearing trainers. But it's not the batting that is the problem. Usually it's running between wickets that causes the issue. Plus they're not as reinforced around the toes. Sometimes some of the shoes that they were wearing. But yeah, they're called spikes. If you look up cricket spikes, Rudra, and Google it, you should be able to see what I mean. Will says, how have you found covering this ODI compared to previous ones? How tricky is it to arrange coverage, including access to video highlights outside the mainstream media? Why is it now the scoreboard rather than the mood board? That's a lot of different questions there. How have you found coverage? Well, it's completely different. The last 2 World Cups I was at, and I was working for Cricinfo, and I was writing match reports and features only. A little bit of preview stuff as well when I was in the city at the right time and everything. I don't know if I did any video in 2019. I probably did some stuff with Alexis, maybe, or Mel. I can't even remember now. 2015, me and Zoltzman had a show. So again, completely different. Me and Zoltzman are at the grounds. We're doing all these different things. We're making puppet shows and doing all that sort of stuff. So it's very different for me. And I didn't have to worry about, arranging coverage before. How tricky is it outside the mainstream media? Yeah, it is. I still get the press release packages, I think, from the ICC. We've got a bit of a team now, so Ari is on the ball with a lot of that sort of stuff. So the minute the Angelo Matthews thing happened, Ari sent me a message, so I don't have to scroll as deep as I used to. Why is it now the scoreboard rather than the mood board? I think the mood board was an accidental name when we came up with it, because I basically said to Muku, I said, if we come up with something that looks like a mood board, we should be able to move around the page and create like a me talking live like a wagon wheel, but with the kinds of graphics we put on the main channel. And so we started calling it the mood board because we never thought about giving it another name. And it was only recently where I was like, it should just be the scoreboard, because like that makes more sense than a mood board. A mood board doesn't really have as much to do with cricket. Which has been your favorite ODI World Cup and why? It's 2003. I backpacked around it. I was there at the final, you know, all the key games. I learned more about cricket on that one tour than I ever had anywhere else before. I've got a ball that I stole from Andrew Simons in the nets that he signed for me. Yeah, I've done a podcast on Red Inker about it. I forget what it's called, sorry. But yeah, I think for me, so if you're asking personally, it's 2003. I think so many incredible things happened as well. John Davison and Kenya, the black armband protest, you know, all these different, I just feel like all these different things happened. Maybe the two best teams in a final, although 99 Pakistan were pretty good, even if they played terribly in that final. Yeah. Patrick says, what do you think the New Zealand team will look like in 5 years' time? Barely tell what they look like now. What do I think they'll look like in 5 years' time? I don't know, Patrick, and I'll tell you exactly why. I just don't know what the pipeline is like. And so that's a pipeline question. I would have to know what young fast bowlers are coming through. And most of the bowlers that I know that are kind of, you know, just behind are older. And so I don't know enough about the younger bowlers coming through to give a really accurate description of that. I like Glenn Phillips. I like Rachin Ravindra. And Mark Chapman's probably not young, but he's going to work it all out. So batting isn't a problem. Spin bowling probably will be a problem, but I suppose you could say always is. Kyle Jamieson is still young, and I still think he'll work out his white ball bowling eventually. But yeah, I don't know enough about that next crop to give you an accurate call on that one. HW341 says, do you think Test cricket would be improved as a media fan product or as a sport if each team's innings was limited to 50 overs, but it was still played with a red or pink ball and didn't have any of the bowling or fielding restrictions of List A cricket? No, I think it would be worse as a media product. I think it would be worse as a fan product. And I think it would be worse as a sport. The main skill of it is it's a marathon sport with changing conditions. You're taking away a lot of those elements with the ideas that you've come up with there. I don't see how that would improve. I mean, it's already got more popularity. It's more people's favorite form of cricket than ODI cricket is, and you're making it more like ODI cricket. That doesn't make any sense to me. It would be over less time. So when you ask from a media perspective, the genius of Test cricket is the fact that you can sell it for 4 and 5 days and that people will come back every day. Under your program, it's a 2-day event, right? So it's very, very different. No, so I can't see how that would improve Test cricket in any single way. There are ways of improving Test cricket. We should have substitutes. He's probably one of them. We should certainly do more day-night stuff. I've got no problem with the pink ball. They need to fix it a little bit more, but it should certainly be something that we're looking at in the future. All right, let's have a quick break here. Oh, he says, as he knocks away the ads. You're listening to Wagon Wheel with Jarrod Kimber, and I've got a few more questions from Patreon, and then after that, there will just be more of Jarrod Kimber. There's just always more of Jarrod Kimber. Picture this, you made a video and now you want the world to see it in their favorite social media platform. You could bowl into the wind by slaving away making edits, or you could let Memento effortlessly cut those epic moments down, making them perfect for your social media followers. It's like having a runner. You play the shot and they do all the hard work. Sync up your podcast and YouTube and they will be the substitute fielder who does all of the work. With Memento, you can craft a long innings down to the best highlights. Make your content, but let Memento cut it. If you're enjoying these live chats, our main channel has even more World Cup videos looking at the greatest performances, the quirkiest stats, and the epic tales of World Cup cricket. Oh, I still got the old question up. Welcome back, but let's actually get the right questions up, shall we? Where is he? Ian says, has the success of lower rated sides in this World Cup helped the chance of expanding numbers going forward? Well, they're already looking at doing that, Ian. Yeah, I mean, there isn't a shit side in this World Cup, right? I mean, you know, Afghanistan didn't win a game last time. Everyone's going to win a game this time, even England. So I think that certainly helps, but I think we already knew that. I think the qualifying tournament was, you know, proof already, but I think cricket was working its own way towards that. They just need to come up with a better system than what we currently have. James says, what are some good examples of players who benefited most from conditions outside their home country? Australian swing bowlers in England like Massey and Alderman come to mind for me. Well, they're interesting because they had good conditions in Perth, right? So they were actually brought up in swing bowling conditions, but the rest of Australia wasn't particularly good, and the ball's not as good for swing bowling. Any finger spinner from Australia, England, South Africa, New Zealand, when playing in Asia, any fast bowler from Asia, it doesn't quite work as much for the fast bowlers from Asia because generally the fast bowlers in Asia, you do get bowlers. I think Kapil Dev might be an example of this, who actually had a better record in Asia than he did away from Asia. That's not the case with all of them, of course. It's very rarely the case with the spinners. You do see that. So that's the famous one of, like, I think there's a lot of players like Nathan Lyon and Ishant Sharma and Dan Vittori who don't get remembered as good as they were because they spent most of their career playing in conditions that just didn't help them. And so then they go over to those other places and suddenly they're absolutely incredible. Ajinkya Rahane was someone who was a lot better when fast bowlers was dominating, which is weird a little bit because he must have been good against spin when he was younger, but certainly at the international level. I mean, Virat Kohli is certainly someone who prefers the faster wickets of Australia. I wonder, would he have been a better player if he had more access to those? The West Indian bowlers in Perth, you know, I mean, they had some good wickets to bowl on in the West Indies. I didn't have the whacker, right? So I think there's quite a few out there, James. Ruja says, what were the weaknesses of the 2007 World Cup South African team? Oh my God, 2007. That batting lineup looks very strong. The pace bowling, oh God, I'd have to have a look at this. South African 2007 World Cup squad. I can't actually remember what the hell happened there. Who we got in that squad? Oh, gone to the Wikipedia page by accident. Hey. Okay. What group were they in? Here we go. So they've got Smith, Lutz, Bosman, Mark Boucher. So they've got De Villiers. Is that before De Villiers gets good? Ashwell Prince. Yeah, it's a pretty average squad, I think, Rudra. I'd have to go through everyone's record. I don't remember Graham Smith, although he kind of made his name in South Africa. That's how he took over the job as someone. But let's just have a look at his one-day record. Average of 37. So, yeah, certainly not as dominant as he was in Test cricket, where he was absolutely fantastic. He's nowhere near that level. I don't know. Is Herschel 2007? I'm trying to think. He was still pretty good, but is he coming to the end, perhaps? Perhaps it's a little bit too early for De Villiers. Callis is good, but, you know, has limited impact in World Cups quite often because of the way he strikes. I would have thought Andrew Hall was coming towards the end there. Justin Kemp, probably one of a little bit bits and pieces. Ashwell Prince, again, I'm going off the top of my head, so I'd have to go through it. It's nowhere near as strong as this team. I wouldn't have thought. And then bowling, Langeveld, Andre Nell, Intini, late career Pollock. He might have still been okay-ish around that time. Telemarcus. Yeah, I mean, it's nowhere near as good as this team. It looks to me just on paper, and I'd have to remember who played where and what stage of their careers they were and everything else. But it looks to me on paper worse than how I remember the 11 team or the 15 team. Do they have a spinner? Who's their spinner? Robin Peterson, lovely fella, but again, not ideal. James says, would Owen Morgan have dropped Coley for batting for his centuries? He wouldn't have dropped him because I don't think he dropped Dal Milan. I think he would have made it very clear that he didn't want him to play that way, and that kind of what we have to do, right? We don't want people to play for centuries. We have to make it clear that we don't want people to play for centuries, which is a weird thing to do when we stop and clap for people who make centuries. James says, Bishan Singh Bedi passed away just yesterday. Where do you think he ranks among Indian spinners and among spinners worldwide? I don't know, James, if you asked this question before I made my video, but I'll talk about it a little bit. Look, he was a fantastic bowler. He was kind of an old-fashioned spinner when he played. Spin bowling was getting a little bit quicker by that point. It was changing as an art form, and if you watch him compared to Derek Underwood or Chandra, or I'm trying to think some of the others that were around at that time, they were just a lot quicker, a lot different kinds of bowlers than he was. That said, he averaged 28, really good record for an Asian spinner in Australia. It's very rare to see that. And his era, Australia were pretty good all the way through his era, really, up until I can't remember if he played in Australia right at the end, but they were a really good team. Dominated New Zealand as well in New Zealand. I think I'm right. Yeah, in New Zealand. New Zealand weren't quite as good, although they were starting to become a good team at that point. But going to New Zealand and doing well as a spinner, I think shows you how flexible he was. He was almost impossible to hit off the square. Incredibly accurate. His whole thing was probably a lot more like Harath, but Harath when the pitches were in his favor, where Harath would just be like, well, I'm just going to hit this length and this line over and over again. And then if you do this, I'm going to shift this by 3 inches or 6 inches, or I'm going to come slightly wider on the crease and slightly, closer to the stumps and all those sorts of things. A little bit quicker, a little bit slower. Those were his main skills. But certainly he was a fantastic player from that point of view. But if you haven't seen my video, I think you'll find that the two things that I think are most interesting is you can make a very big claim that he was the most patient bowler that ever existed, and also one of the most economical bowlers who ever existed. And then he was the greatest fourth innings bowler ever. And it's not even close. I think Ambrose is at 16.5 in the fourth innings average, and Bishan Bedi was at 14.5. So 2 runs better than the closest player. That probably tells us that if he bowled on the modern Indian wickets, his figures would his bowling average would probably drop just remarkably. Because a lot of the wickets that they bowled on those days were certainly much more. Indian wickets were historically very good for batting in a way that they're not now. And if they had doctored the wickets and made them most friendly, as they do for Ashwin and Jadeja, it would just be a different. I wonder if he would be thought of as one of the greatest bowlers of all time. And this is why all these things matter. And it's why it's great that I was just flicking through his record, really. I think I was just to say this guy was a brilliant bowler, one of the best left dumping spinners of all time. And then you find something like that and you're like, oh, okay. And I would now give anything to go back. I think both of the spells I found were not in Asia. And I don't think we're in the fourth innings. I think that's right. So I don't know if there is any great footage of him bowling in the fourth innings outside of just highlights of his wickets. And there's not many of those online either. Richard says, what was the issue with Greg Chappell as India coach? I feel like I've seen articles in recent years about him having good ideas, about wanting to develop a pace attack and have a young team. But my vague memories of those in India, of India being awful in 2007 World Cup, playing a lot better when he was gone. I think it was just, as much as anything, was a personality clash. He was a very famous person in Australia. He was obviously a brilliant batter, certainly top 50 batters of all time, maybe top 25. Comes from a cricket family. They're very stubborn as a people, the Chappellis. There's only one Chappelli, I suppose. Very stubborn through a very long bloodline now. He believed it should be played his way. He was a selector for Australia, and he rubbed up the Australian team really poorly at times as well. This is what I've heard, that he had this way of saying things that made people, I don't want to say feel uncomfortable, that made people kind of like, I can't believe he said this to me. And, maybe didn't have a good bedside manner and however else you want to look at those things. And I think that was certainly an issue. Um, Also, he was probably trying to be quite progressive, and they weren't being particularly progressive at that stage. There was a culture around around the players, and he was trying to break that up because he wanted them to play his way. And at that stage, it probably didn't fit particularly well. Josh says, in the past, you've talked about how Aussie rules has inspired the IPL playoffs. Are you familiar with the dual tournament format for 14 pools? See Google images. I'd love to have a 16-team World Cup with 4 pools of 4 and then 2 pools of 4 semis and final. That was inspired by Korean video game tournament. I don't know if I know about that. I'm trying to think. 4 pools of 4, then 2 pools of 4. I mean, it's an interesting one. They have to come up with better methods to be able to get more teams in the World Cup, especially as now so many more teams are good. But they also need to make sure that, that there. I like the idea of playing each team twice in pools, or however you do that. If it's, or you're probably only playing each team once, though, I suppose. But yes, I think we should experiment more with ideas like this. And off the top of my head, looking at that, Josh, and sorry, I didn't see the Google images images that you put up. That sounds like a solid, interesting idea. James says, could Michael Nissa realistically usurp Cameron Green as Australia's Test all-rounder? No. I don't think Michael Nissa is an all-rounder, by the way. I think he's a bowler who can bat a little bit at Test level. I've got no problem with him being a first-class player. I think in order to be a Test all-rounder at first-class level, you probably have to bat 5 or 6 at the lowest, and you have to average 35 to 40, right? Michael Nissa with the bat in first-class cricket averages 29, and my memory of it is he bats 7 and 8 for the majority of his career. I have to do a deeper dive to do that. If you bat at 7, or let's say you bat at 7, there's a tax in first class cricket. The further you bat back in the order, the easier it is, because the ball is going to be a lot softer, and the first and second change bowlers, you're not going to come across too many first class teams who have multiple bowlers. So you talk to Test players, and what they say is it's not that first class cricket is easier than Test cricket. It's that when you're batting, you are always under pressure in Test cricket because there is always the best bowler from their local team bowling against you. Whereas in first-class cricket, getting between 50 and 100, if you're a really top-level batter, is quite easy because you've seen off the hardest thing and you might have to see off one more spell. So it's really about your emotions and your fitness and all those, and decision-making at that point. If you look at the players who have come in who are seen as all-rounders who bat at number 7 and 8, their numbers do not transfer very well into Test cricket. They usually go down. Now, there is a difference sometimes when a player, they might have played their whole career and they actually get picked to play international cricket when they're 28. So they might be at the peak of their batting age at that stage. That is slightly different. But overall, if Michael Nissa averaged 23 or 22 in Test cricket, I think he'd be doing fantastically well. That's absolutely fine if he's batting at number 8. Right? That's a decent number 8. That's a Mitch Starc, Pat Cummins type of number 8. It's not a number 7, so he's not an all-rounder. He's not actually giving Australia an extra bowling person. If you're looking at who might come in, I think Aaron Hardy is more of a chance, although trying to remember, at least Aaron Hardy's batted higher in the order, although I'm saying that off the top of my head. And Aaron Hardy is averaging 43 in first-class cricket, and 28 with the ball. That is someone who profiles as a Test all-rounder. Michael Nissa does not profile as a Test all-rounder. Would they ever pick him alongside Green on basis of his all-round form? If they thought he was in the best 4 bowlers, or if they were in a situation where they thought Green had got to a Callis or Stokes or Flintoff level, where he was close enough to being in the top 4 bowlers that they could then have someone they were less, not as worried about. The problem with it doesn't matter who you bring into that side. If you have Cummins, Hazelwood and Starc probably need the new ball, right? And if you drop them, Cummins is probably going to take one of them. Cummins is probably going to have to take the new ball. And then Nissa is going to have to bowl first change when he's an opening bowler. You've always got to factor that in, right? Are they really going to want to open with, let's say, Hazelwood and Nissa and have Cummins at first change? And maybe they will, right? But then is Nissa and Hazelwood too similar? They're probably not, but maybe they are. All those things matter. How can Nissa bowl with the older ball on flat pitches is the difference between him being a test bowler and not being a test bowler. And I haven't done the numbers to be able to tell you. Jake says, you had a question recently about people sucking up to India. I did. What do you think of the mainly English and Australian journalists who go completely the other way and have just decided the BCCI, IPL, and India equals bad? Plenty of legitimate criticisms of the BCCI, but significantly more talk about poor crowds this World Cup. When the last T20 World Cup was even worse for non-India and Australian games. I mean, it's kind of bad for everyone, wasn't it? Most egregious being Gideon Haigh comparing the crowd in Ahmedabad to the Nuremberg rally. Well, that's a very, very interesting one that you point out. That's nowhere near the most egregious one. It's not in the top 100. There was an Australian article that compared Virat Kohli to Donald Trump. Way worse than what Gideon was going on about was the fact that they had turned a cricket match and a cricket board into a wing of the political party, and they were having a political rally. Nuremberg rally, as you said, is probably the wrong way of putting it. But Gideon isn't really what you're talking about. In fact, I would say what you're really talking about is the casual asides from people that you get quite a bit. And it's a really big topic. There is certainly a superiority complex that Australian and English people in cricket, or English people have always had, and Australia have had since basically they've been any good at cricket. That plays a part. There's a changing of the guards that a lot of them don't like. A lot of them have had bad experiences as well with Indian fans. I would say that, I would say almost the Bangladesh and the West Indian fans are probably the most hard to deal with online. However, there's a lot more in India. So generally, it feels like the Indian fans are worse than anywhere else, where I don't think they're any worse than, a vast majority of fans, if we're being honest. I'm not sure they're any worse than South African fans, which I can also find to be really annoying at times. But there's not that many South African fans, and there's hundreds of millions of Indian fans, it seems, at any one stage. So I think that plays a part. I think the fact that they have to suck up to India for work plays a part. What else would it be? I think a lot of them believe in the heterodoxy of seam bowling being the most important kind of bowling, and spin bowling, because of India, has, I think, so when they see spin bowling, they cry foul a little bit more. I'm trying to think of that's what I mean. There's so many facets to this. There's the political, there's the financial, there's the fans. There is the, was it Nasser Hussain called a player a donkey, right? And we all know he was just saying that this field is not moving particularly well on the field. But that plays completely differently to that Indian crowd. And then he feels hectored by Indian fans in a way that if he had said that about another country's fans, he wouldn't have been attacked in the same way. All those things. And I've been with them from day one on both sides. And also the BCCI have done some horrendous things when it comes to, treatments of other boards. The whole, what happened in Bangladesh during the 2015 World Cup with, the boards, and what Srinivasan did, the way that they deal with the media, and you are talking about the media here, right? The way that the BCCI treat the media, they've gone out of their way to upset people at times. They have started to act just as bad, if not worse at times, than England and Australia did. In some ways, they act a lot better, and they're a lot more progressive, which is nice. But in other ways, they don't. So there's that. And a lot of it is just you lose your power. There's also definitely a racial dynamic. There is a legacy dynamic, I think, is part of it. I could go on for hours here, Jake. There are so many different parts of how it all works. And I think the changing dynamic of of cricket is, here's my favorite one, and it's never mentioned anymore. Matthew Hayden said that the reason you have so many delays in India is because it's a third world country. And now listen to the way he talks about India. Right? There are a lot of people who still feel that way. There are people in the media who absolutely hate going to India and covering cricket. And sometimes it can be the quality of the facilities. Sometimes it is they don't like India, the country. Sometimes they don't like commenting or writing on India because everything is put through the fine-tooth comb when you do it. I'm trying to think of other reasons I don't like it. A BCCI, causing issues. BCCI giving, what was it, Cricinfo 1 seat in the press box, right? So, and not allowing photographers in 1 year. I can't even remember the full detail. There's a lot that goes on, right? And the important thing to remember is these people quite often moan about the other nations as well, but the other nations aren't as important and no one gives a shit, right? That's what it comes down to. If you actually listen to these people, they could be far more negative about far more places, right? Than they can often be about India. But what's going to be reported by if a former player or a commentator comes out and says something? What's going to be more read? An article slagging off the PCB or an article slagging off the BCCI, right? So a lot of it is also about that. And I would say that there are a lot of journalists who also know that slagging off the BCCI will get them reads, right? And let's say they write 3 articles a year slagging off the BCCI, India, Virat, name your IPL, all the things that you mentioned there, right? Then their editor doesn't probably know much about cricket culture. Most sports editors outside of Asia aren't cricket people, right? They're usually, football or, rugby or whatever, right? They don't know, but this smart journalist is like, wow, I can get myself, a couple of 100,000 reads here by saying this. And it's disingenuous, but it's also how the business works. And so all these things play a part. I think that's probably fair to say. Hamza says, who did Pakistan turn to as the main white ball spinner after the World Cup? Do they keep Shadab, Nawaz, or Usama around? Well, Nawaz is still a handy player, so they're not going to get rid of him. You don't get rid of, defensive left arm finger spinners who can bat a bit, right? So he'll be around. Whether he's front line anymore, I don't know. Shadab, I think, is a technical issue. I would be sending him to Abdul Qadir. Sadly, Shane Warne's no longer with us. Who else is Richie's no longer with us. Terry Jenner's no longer with us. I'm missing someone else, obvious though. Mushtaq Ahmed might be another one. Perhaps even Anil Kumble. Or he might be too expensive these days. I don't know. But I'd be sending him to someone like that and just going. I would send the still of Rashid Khan, Usama Mir, and Shadab Khan all bowling that they put on the TV the other day, and you can see the hips are not right. I would send him to whichever expert they think can help them with that to fix him. And then Usama Mir, look, he can spin the ball and he's tall. It's a really interesting combination. I've seen more of him in this World Cup than I've ever seen before. So at the moment, outside of a couple of T20 games where I thought he did okay, I don't have a strong enough opinion to say what the future is. But again, his natural skill set and wouldn't be something I'd be throwing away. It might be something that I'd be, again, looking to see if there's another way that he can bowl and develop into the future. But I wouldn't think he'd be, I'd be throwing him away just because of that. Outside of that, I'm not as much of an expert on who else is out there. Again, the more I cover global cricket, the harder it is for me to know who the next tier of players are. Unless, I'm watching a T20 league or I watch a bit of A cricket when I can. And I see someone coming through that's obvious. And in that case, I'll mention them, the ways to go on about Kyle Jameson. But I would have to do that. But of those 3 guys, I don't think any of them is for the tip. But that doesn't mean that there are definitely things that you need to do to fix all that issue. I know we've got a super chat and we've probably got a couple of other comments I will try and get to very, very quickly. But let us first just have a very quick break. And then when we come back, we can talk about all the things I want to say off the top of my head that I'm forgetting. What do I want to talk about when we come back? We'll get to the comments is what I meant. This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. If you're enjoying these live chats, our main channel has even more World Cup videos looking at the greatest performances, the quirkiest stats, and the epic tales of World Cup cricket. This show was made by HCL Tech, a company that believes in partnerships so much you can read their name on the Australian shirt. This show leans in hard on data and technology, so we are proud to work with HCL Tech, leaders in their field. All right, welcome back. We've got a couple of super chats. Shrikant says, and thank you very much, Shrikant, why is it so hard to create a durable white ball? Okay, so the white ball doesn't die. Which is weird because it does actually die. But you can't dye the leather white. You have to spray it on or paint it on, essentially. And so that peels. Whereas the red ball and the pink ball don't peel. That is the main reason why it doesn't particularly work. And then you say, why do we have a vibrant market for red balls but not for white balls? Well, this one's the easiest question I'll ever have to answer. What percentage of cricket balls in the entire world do you think are white compared to red? Right? Forget professional cricket. Think of all cricket. Right? It doesn't actually make sense to have a lot of people doing white ball, which is why the ICC, if they were run correctly and not their fault in this particular case, they should own the ball manufacturers. They should buy the three companies that you mentioned, Dukes, SG, and Kookaburra. They should use the skills of all those three different companies to make the best balls, maybe even make different balls for different locations if they have to. Whatever they need to do. I would argue we don't have a very vibrant market for red balls, though. I don't think having three companies. So Dukes is about 12 people. SG is a decent-sized company, but they're not like one of the world's biggest companies. And Kookaburra is a small factory in Melbourne. We think they're big companies because we're in cricket and we listen to these names all the time. They're not Wilson. They're not Adidas. They're not Nike, right? It's a big step down. And, I think because of that, they're not particularly good. And I think that's part of the reason we don't have a viable enough industry when it comes to cricket balls. And, I think I've done a video on this on the major channel, Shrikant. But there is absolutely no doubt that cricket ball technology, the cricket ball market, is partially to blame for the fact we don't have better balls. Amvit says, I have a perception that Kohli is involved in a truckload of run-outs. Do you think that is true? Also, do you think that quick runs aren't as risk-free in comparison to boundaries? I don't think he's involved with a lot of run-outs. I could maybe try and look at that. It's a tricky one, but I think I can look it up. There really aren't a lot of players that are, Inzi, Rory Hamilton-Brown, perhaps, back when he played for Surrey. Shout out to Rory if he's watching. I don't think I've noticed anything. Doesn't mean that it's not true. But I would have thought, maybe I'm wrong though, but I would have thought someone would have worked that out if that was the case. And if they haven't, then maybe that's why. And then you say, also, do you think that quick runs aren't as risk-free in comparison to boundaries? I think quick runs are less risky than boundaries, but boundaries pay off more. It's the West Indies thing of getting to a position where they didn't want to score any boundaries anymore. We certainly saw that, and it worked for them in T20 cricket. It brings other problems. I know there are players who believe this. In one-day cricket, though, you do need to rotate the strike a little bit more, I believe. But there's a huge amount of risk in playing attacking shots. I think it was CricViz did a study that said about 33% of attacking shots are successful in boundaries. There's a lot of wickets in that then. And so also that's about the same as Yorkers, by the way. Weird one. Amwish said, would any Irish Northern, but you can include Republic too for the fun of it, or Scottish players make it into the Britain Island? So I don't think that. So Hypercourse put a comment in about this the other day. I think the Northern Irish players can play for Team GB or Ireland, someone was telling me, or maybe even represent themselves, although they probably wouldn't have a team on their own. I think that's what he was doing, and someone else might have contacted me about that as well. No, I don't think there's any players in those sides. But I think if it's a Team GB cricket team, I would think they would have to include probably some Scottish players would be my guess. But I don't know. I don't know enough about the Team GB. I'm interested in parts of the Olympics. I'm very not interested in Team GB. It's probably a 2012 hangover. So yeah, I think they would have to do that intentionally if they wanted to. Keshav says, do you think England and Pakistan are suffering because their attack consists of T20 suited bowlers more than test bowlers, unlike every other team mostly? Oh, well, no, because I mean, if you look at Pakistan, Hassan Ali has a test bowling average of 25. Shaheen Afridi has been incredible. Haris Rauf, probably not like a frontline guy you want to bowl in tests. Shadab Khan, I think, should have a record in tests if he played, more towards his peak years. Nawaz is a defensive specialist, but a few teams have things like that. So no, definitely not Pakistan. And who's England? Well, Sam Curran's a test bowler. Chris Wokes is a test bowler. Adil Rashid is bowled in tests. Who else we got? Reece Topley's pretty good, so he's fine. Yeah, Livingston. Moeen Ali was a test bowler. No, I don't think that's true. Tushara says, what do you think about the inclusion of Angelo Matthews to Sri Lanka's team? Does this strengthen Sri Lanka's 11? I'm not sure it matters. Is he going to play? Dude, I don't really understand it. So Patharana was in the squad. He's out. And Matthews has come in? Does that mean they got the original squad wrong? I'm not even sure what it means. It's so confusing when teams do this. And it's different if you're in a position still to win the tournament. But why would you bring Matthews in now when you'd much be better off to bring in a younger player and get them some experience, or a player that you want to try? Or a bowler? I don't know. It's so confusing. I don't see what the benefit is of bringing Angelo Matthews into this squad at the moment. And I love Angelo. I'm like, world's biggest fan of Angelo Matthews. But I'm sitting there going, why have they done this? It doesn't make much sense to me at all. RR says, T20 World Cup should be also every 4 years. Yes, definitely. I think we'll probably end up with a T20 World Cup, an Olympics, and like some sort of Champions Trophy / Euros is wrong, but you know what I mean, like a knockout type tournament, something boutiquey, but ICC have to make their money. I think that's where we'll end up. With a very different format of some kind. I don't know, Champions of Champions, whatever you want to call it. And then you'll have the 50 over World Cup, and then eventually maybe they'll have. What would you have? You got the World Cup. So if they can make it work, they would have some other. They want to have 4 tournaments for the men's cricket every year, and it does become a little bit more tetchy if ODI cricket does drop off. But yes, there's no reason to have a World Cup more than every 4 years, and then you just have other trophies. I would have thought, but I don't know what the current thinking is on that. But the Olympics is certainly one. The Commonwealth Games is another one, but the ICC don't make any money off that. So I can't see them pushing men's cricket into the Commonwealth Games. And RR again says, another super chat. Thank you, RR. He paid more for this one too. It is the same RR. I had to check. Ravi Shastri Wrigley says the BCCI needs to improve stadiums. Yes. Ahmedabad probably going to host the Olympics in 2036. It will probably change the sporting culture here. It'd be interesting. Yeah, it's... I think there's a lot of places in the world that in cricket that the stadiums aren't up to scratch. Australia was probably lucky that the cricket stadiums are Australian rules grounds, and they make a lot more money because of that. Not all of them, but obviously the vast majority. Actually, maybe all of them. Is Bellerive? I can't remember. They might play local footy there, but I think the majority of them play a version of AFL or Australian rules football and make some money there. But you do notice when you're in the Australian stadiums compared to everyone else, England, some of the stadiums are upskilling very, very fast. That was something that had to do with 100 as well. All this stuff about we're going to make the game more attractive to women. Have you thought of changing facilities? Have you thought of somewhere to put prams? Have you thought of a family room? Even little things like, I think in all the England rooms now, I forget what they call it. Is it the rooms that they have for children of autism? The tactile rooms. Oh my God, I should remember the name and I've forgotten it. Things like that. Like all these things matter. Proper food stalls, better toilets, women's toilets in some places. It's still hilarious to me that like we say we want more women at the cricket, but if we have more women at the cricket, literally they can't use the toilets because there aren't enough women's toilets and they aren't set up correctly. Just in general, I think we've started to see with some grounds getting better at that sort of outside cricket stuff as well. Again, it's an easier thing to do in Australia, but England is starting to get quite good at it. New Zealand, I think. South Africa have done some good stuff when I've been to them. I'm trying to think if there's another country I went to. But you know what I mean? Like the atmosphere at and around and, having a concert at the end of the day's play, having stuff for kids to play on when they get a bit bored during the games, taking classic catches, all that sort of stuff. Cricket could do a lot more, and India is one place, but India is the one place I would say that has the money from cricket to fix this, right? I haven't been to Ahmedabad, so I can't mention it. My memory of Wankhede was that it was a pretty good stadium. Pune might have been another one that I thought, but there's obviously some ones where it's just like it's not. I like Eden Gardens. I love Eden Gardens so much. It's one of my favorite places in the world. But oh my God, like it's falling apart in such a tragic way. And it certainly needs to be updated. And they have the money, they have the desire. It's just about the will to be able to update those grounds and make them better. What I would say, and when Ravi Shastri says that BCCI need to improve the stadiums, this is the problem with cricket in general. This isn't a BCCI thing or an Indian cricket thing. Is that there is no listening to fans. There is no fans in cricket, probably because they're all in different countries and all in different regions in some places as well within those countries, don't really have a unified voice. But how dare the people who run cricket in any country make money off these people, off all of these fans, and then not make it a comfortable situation for them to be in the stadium? How dare they do that, right? I've been in these corporate suites. I promise you, I've been in a corporate suite in Gaul, right, where I was taken there by whoever the chairman of Sri Lankan cricket was at that stage. Nicest whiskies, air-conditioned, lovely desk for the chairman, right? And the press facilities weren't good. The facilities for the fans were absolutely disgusting at times in Gaul. And what is a tourism ground where you want people from around the world to travel to? That they put the prices up when certain fans, especially English, but I think also perhaps now Indian and Australian fans get charged slightly more. I certainly know they do for England. And then they can't make the facilities better. I'm sorry, it just upsets me the way that cricket boards have always treated fans of this game, right? The BCCI has no power without cricket fans. The BCCI didn't really create anything. Cricket was brilliant, and Indians loved cricket and they flocked to it. And eventually, after a long period of time, the BCCI worked out how to best harness that for themselves, money and for power, right? Which is a perfectly acceptable way of how capitalism works. And we understand all that, and that's fine. But there are so many boards around the world absolutely taking the piss at the quality of their stadiums. And, I've been to Premier League stadiums as well, to, Crystal Palace and Brentford. I know Brentford has upgraded their ground. I haven't been to the new one, but Crystal Palace was a bit shit too. So it's not just cricket. There are a lot of team owners, boards, organizations who run these sports who manage to always look after themselves and don't manage to look after the fans. It's simply not acceptable. And I think, especially the places who have money, especially the places who should know better, should be fixing that. And I think that is right across the board. But RR, thank you for your super chats. And also to Shrikant, thank you for his. Thank you to everyone. I know that, oh my God, brought him up twice. Thank you to everyone. I know this is the second chat for the day. How you all aren't sick of the side of me, the way that I am sick of the side of me. But no, thank you all for supporting us. Scoreboard will be back tomorrow, Australia, Netherlands. Working on a bunch of features that I'm hoping will come out very, very soon, but some cool things that we're working on as well. But if you like these chats, go and listen to the double centuries. Me and Abhishek do a lot of work in those, and the World Cup series is absolutely fascinating. But that's all I have for now, and I will see you again tomorrow. And thank you for the support. Like, subscribe, press the bell icon, do all the things that make us happy. Have you ever wondered how I watch so much cricket? I use VPNs to log into accounts from all around the world. But because before, even simple things like when something exciting would happen in a match, I would rush over to social media, and when I got there, the clips would say something along the lines of, "This video is not available in your area." In fact, most of the coolest cricket stuff in the world at the moment is geo-blocked because some random board didn't sign a deal where you happen to live. If you're a hardcore cricket nerd, the only way is to have a VPN, and we suggest Surfshark. They will give you the speed of your favorite quick bowler. They're as inventive as a T20 batter after a bunch of dot balls, and they're as secure as a specialist wicketkeeper with the softest hands in the world. And guess what? The kind folks at Surfshark are going to give you a deal. Enter the promo code Kimber for an extra 3 months free at surfshark.deals/Kimber. There are probably other things that Surfshark can help you with, like data and identity theft and traceability and intrusive advertising. But for us, it is our best weapon against the evil cricket geo-block. Go to Surfshark and type my name in, KIMB